As a reminder, for more Microsoft webcasts, you can visit microsoft.com/webcast. And again, I'd like to welcome everyone to today's TechNet webcast, Introduction to SQL Server 2005 Integration Services. And without any further delay, I'm going to turn the floor over to today's presenter, John Weston.
Thanks, Tracy. And good afternoon, or good evening, or even good morning. It depends upon where you're watching this, or even you're watching it from a recording. Welcome, everybody, to the SQL Server 2005 webcast. Today we're going to talk about integration services. As you can see from the slide I've got up there, my name is John Weston. I'm part of the Microsoft Across America team. I'm part of the TechNet team. We go out there and do seminars, webcasts, user groups, meetings, blogs, all kinds of fun stuff to IT professionals out there. So if you want to send me some information or get a contact with me, my email address is jweston, so for jweston at microsoft.com. And I also maintain a technical blog that you can go out there and get some great information. That technical blog is at blogs, with an S, technet.com/jweston. As part of that blog, I will take the questions and answers that you submit and make sure all the answers are exactly correct and post them up on my blog. I did this webcast last week, so if you don't get a chance to stick around for the whole thing, it's out there and recorded, and the links to it is on my blog and the questions that got asked last week on doing this. Also on upcoming blogs, if you're really, this is just the introduction portion of it, I'm going to do an in-depth integration services or a more of an advanced level next Wednesday, I think that's the 14th of March. So stay tuned for that one if you want to go out and find some more information. But again, my blogs and email addresses are there in the Q&A log if you didn't cover those, so you can look those up. So what are we going to cover today? Let's dive right into it. We're going to talk about SQL Server 2005, specifically the integration services component. We'll take an overview of what integration services is as part of the business intelligence platform, excuse me, and how it differs from the old data transformation services, or DTS, that we had in previous versions of SQL Server back in the 2000 days. We'll talk about new data sources, data destinations, allowing you to extract data from all different kinds of sources, and the various destinations we can direct information from integration services. We'll also discuss some of the enhanced data flow operations and data transformations you can improve and perform with integration services, and how the performance has been significantly improved from the previous versions. Hopefully by the end of the session you'll be able to use this new integration services to quickly and reliably, that's also important there, to retrieve data from sources within your organization, transform that data, bring them all together in one coherent little spot, and be able to work with those within your organization. So what kind of background or prerequisites do we have for this session? First, it would be helpful if you had a background with DTS. Again, DTS is Data Transformation Services from the previous versions of SQL Server, or any other what we call ETL process. And ETL stands for Extract, Transform, and Load. So being familiar with those type of things. And of course, familiar with the database like SQL Server 2005, or the previous versions in SQL Server 2000 would be helpful. But again, not required. This is a level 200 course. I will be doing a level 300 course on this topic again next week in another webcast. So what's our agenda? What are we going to try to cover today? We'll start off by taking a look at 2005 Integration Services, the successor to DTS. We'll learn where it fits in as part of the BI portal or the BI platform. And we'll go through and start building some basic integration services packages. Next, we'll take a look at how to improve your data integrity using this integration services. We'll take a look at a business case for using integration services and issues to be aware of when upgrading from DTS. Then we'll expose you to some of the new ETL functionality with integration services. And finally, before we wrap things up today, we'll talk about the new data sources and destinations within integration services and how these can help you both extract and load your data in many different ways. So let's do some background stuff, make sure we're all on the same page here before we get too far into this stuff. Essentially, Integration Services is a brand new application that's a part of the Microsoft SQL Server Business Intelligence Platform. Integration Services is also the successor to DTS, or Data Transformation Services, that was a part of SQL Server 2000, as I mentioned before. However, this product has completely changed from the ground up. It's not just a new rev to the old product. many new architectural changes, new features from the previous versions. Integration services is so much more robust than the previous DTS that it should be considered a completely new product. And we'll talk about upgrade paths, how you get from the old one to the new one. Like DTS, integration services is included with SQL Server. It provides a platform for a new generation of high-end, high-platform data integration technologies. Out of the box, IS, or integration services, should be the only product you need to perform traditional ETL data transformations or more advanced data integration. Integration services allows you to perform many kinds of complex data flow and data transformation tasks that were not possible in previous products. Next, let's talk about what is BI. So business intelligence, or BI for short, is made up of three major components. The first of those three is integration services, exactly what we're going to talk about today, which involves acquiring data from data sources, whether they're online transaction processing systems or OLTP systems, flat files, or any other type of information that you want to aggregate, transform, clean up, and then perform useful analysis on. Next component of BI is analysis services. Analysis services allows you to take data in your database and enrich it with business logic, hierarchical views, and the ability to specify parcels of information and discover data and data patterns throughout the data mining component. And finally, the third pillar of BI is reporting services. I've done several webcasts on those. If you go out there and search under Microsoft.com/webcast and search under either my name or SQL Server reporting services, I did a whole bunch of series of webcasts back in the November, December time frame. Go and take a look at those if you're interested in details on reporting services. Reporting services helps you determine the presentation and distribution of data. It allows you to take a look at what's inside your data, analyze it, make it available to your end users, making data access for anywhere within the enterprises. So all three of these pieces come up together, help you organize and make the most of your business information. Now that we've learned a little bit about SQL Server IS and how it fits into BI, let's take a look at the product in action. Enough of these slides. So in this first demonstration, I wanted to go through and learn a little bit or show you a little bit about Business Intelligence Development Studio, or the product that we create transformations. We're going to build a data flow and show you how to create one new one from scratch. And then we'll also use other types of tasks and show you some canned demonstrations that are included with the product. So now as I open this view sharing, you may want to full screen this. So Control H or F5. Notice if you press F5, it's kind of like a toggle. So if you hopefully press the F5, you'll be able to see my entire environment. I'm running Vista as my host operating system here. And with Vista, I've got a virtual PC configuration set up. So you can see at the top of the screen here, this is Microsoft Virtual PC 2007 that I'm running. And I've created us a SQL Server environment with a Windows Server 2003. So you can tell from my wallpaper here, this is Enterprise Edition of Server 2003 that I'm running. And I've installed SQL Server on top of that. So you can see that my excuse me, my SQL Server is running. So the first thing I'm going to do is open up this icon I've got on my desktop, the SQL Server Business Intelligence Development Studio. This is included with SQL Server. It's a special version of Visual Studio 2005 that allows us to develop projects and solutions for analysis services, reporting services, as well as integration services. There we go. Looks like I got it started up here. So this is what it comes up with when we first open it up. So the first thing we want to do is create a new integration services project. So if I go up here to File, now my voice may be delayed up to as long as 30 seconds before you actually see the screens here. So what I'll try to do is describe very carefully the click steps that I'm doing. I know it may seem redundant that I'm saying every single click step, but the reason I do that is because my voice may be off time from what you actually see on the screen. So I want you to be able to follow along and understand. A lot of times I'll get questions, well, how did John get there and how did he do that? And people want to go back and watch the webcast again. So I'll try to go real slow in these demos, but there's a lot of click steps to the individual things to what we want to show you today. So the first thing I'm going to do once I got the Business Intelligence Studio open is I'm going to go to File, New, and we're going to create a new project. And notice the different types of projects I can do. Analysis services, reporting services. I can do integration services. And click OK there. So it's going to create integration services project number 4 for us. When you create this new project, creates a new package and automatically opens it. Two parts integration services package you'll spend most of the time on today is control flow. As you see, the tab it's automatically defaulted to, and the data flow tab. Okay, so we can switch back and forth between those, and you kind of watch how that works. Over here on the right-hand side, we've got this thing called a Solution Explorer, and this is where we connect it to individual data sources and data source views, allowing me to be able to connect to filtered data. It doesn't have to be just SQL Server. I can connect to all different types of data and all different sources of data out there. So I've got this sample package.dtsx. Notice it is an XML format that we are going to save our DTS package. So it's not just the old DTS extension, it's DTSX. We could connect and export information to all kinds of different formats here. All right, so everything looks good there so far. So first thing I want to do here is design this package and how I want to make it work. So if I click on the toolbox here on the left-hand side, notice it's kind of a fly out from the left-hand side. If I just cursor off of it, it flies back in there. So if I go to the left-hand side and go to the toolbox, notice it defaults to the control flow items. There's a lot of other things here, but because my context is set to the control flow tab here, my toolbox is going to do control flow tasks that I might want to do. These tasks that I might do is such things as sending an email with SMTP, performing an FTP file function, operating system commands, SQL scripts, maintenance operations such as a backup of a database. I could do all kinds of things. One of the most important types of tasks that we do is data flow task, where you can define the data source and the destination. So this is kind of where we do all that transformation of data from one source to the other. So let's go ahead and do a data flow task. So I come down here and find data flow task, click on it, and all I'm doing is holding down my mouse click and dragging it over to my design surface here and letting go. Take it just a second here. My little hard drive, my laptop, and virtual PC is chugging away there. There we go. So now I have a data flow task header created on my desktop that we can work with. So if I double click inside this data flow task, notice what happens. So a couple things I want you to watch real quick here when I double click on this. Watch how the tab's going to change over for me. So if I double click on the data flow task, notice it looks and brought me a new design format. Almost looks identical to it. Let me again show you where I was. There I was on the control flow, and I double clicked inside of here, and it just switched me over to the data flow and brought me in a whole new design service for me to work with. This allows me to be able to build the data flow. So here now, when I switch over and hit on the toolbox, we get a different list of things. These are the data flow sources instead of the control flow items that I saw in the previous example. All kinds of things we can do here: aggregate, data conversion, data mining queries. First thing we got to do is we got to have some data to work with. So I'm going to do a raw file data source. So I'm going to take that and drag it out here to my design surface. So I've got a raw file source. We drag it and drop it onto the design surface. This raw file source reads in data from a raw file created by the integration services that sends data to the raw file destination. In this case, we've got a raw file that contains data extracted by integration services from a database and placed into the raw format. And that's what we're going to use for our first demonstration here. We'll need to specify the path for the raw file that we're going to use. So to do that, I'm going to double click on the raw data source. And down here, now one of the things, first thing I want to do is anytime you double click and open up another dialog box, real good habit to get in the habit of doing is you want to maximize the screens here. So you'll see me do this, and the first 3 or 4 times I'll remind you to do it. So you want to maximize it, because notice I would have missed this little refresh button. There are a lot of buttons on the bottom and on the left-hand side that for whatever reason you won't see it all until you maximize that window. So one of my little tips to remember all the time with integration services is to be able to make sure you maximize all the screens, because sometimes you'll see a little bit different things here. So we're going to have a raw file and the name. We're going to point it there. So let's look at the file name that I want to point it to. So I click on the little ellipse here, and then I'm going to browse to some demo files that I've got on our server here. So I click on demo file. There's my database returns.dat. Click OK and open there, and an open there. So now that tells that raw data file source to go out there and get the data that we've got in that file. We have many different types of transformations available when we use the data flow. So I'm going to go back over to my toolbox. And what kind of transformation do I want to do first? Let's do an aggregate. So grab the aggregate and drop it on the desktop here. There we go. Let me just move that over. I can move them wherever. If I want to put it way over here, I could do that, or wherever. It's simplest just to kind of put them in order. So I got an aggregate there. So I can do all kinds of things like fuzzy lookups, row counting, sorting operators. We'll get to the aggregate task and do all that. So how does our data get from this raw source to the aggregate function that we want to create? Notice when I had the raw source file clicked, this little green arrow comes from it, and exactly as you can imagine, I take it, and it just showed me that bubble right there, drag that green arrow down here to the aggregate, and let go with my mouse click, and it makes the connection between the two. So that green arrow shows that my data is going to flow from my raw data source into my aggregate. Let's go take a look at what functions we want to build inside of this aggregate. So I'm going to double click inside of the aggregate 1. Oops, helps if I click off of it first. There we go. So inside aggregate number 1, the aggregate transformation editor is going to open. Again, getting in the habit of maximizing things. So here we'll add the title ID and the item count ID fields. And we'll specify that the item count and the operators to be formed to count these distinct operations here. So let's walk through this. So here's all my available fields that I've got from this table that we're importing. So we're going to grab the title ID and the item count. And down here in the bottom of the fields, I want to look at the item count row. So notice the item count row here. And I want to look at the operators that might be available to me. Here I've got group by, count, count distinct. Now that's what I want to do. So these are unique. Okay, so we're going to count distinct item counts. Next, we want to add up the total weight of all the products that were returned to the store. So we're talking about returns here. So click on the weight field. And now in the weight field, in the drop-down box here, I'm going to do, let's do a sum. So we get a total weight. So we're going to add up all the weight of all the items that have been returned. And it looks like we're good to go. As with data sources, you have several data destinations available to use in integration services. So I'm going to go back over to my toolbox over here. And I want to select what do I want. I want a destination. So where do we want to put things? I want to put them down in an OLDB data destination. So we'll put this out in a database format. So I take an OLDB data, easy for me to say, OLEDB data destination, drag that over to my desktop. There we go. Toolbox flies away. We're going to move this guy around a little bit. There we go. So next we want to connect the aggregate calculation function that we just did. Grab the green arrow as part of that function and take it to our destination, and then our data is going to continue to flow there. Next, we'll specify where the data should be sent. To do this, we first need to create an OLDB connection task for you to use. So I'm going to go into this OLDB and double-click on it. And this brings up the OLDB destination editor. Now I could use an existing file that's already out there if I wanted to. We'll click on New to define a new database connection. And the connection manager comes up, and I'm going to need to specify which server. So it's this one I'm going to work with. Notice I've got two different SQL servers out there, so I click on New. And we'll put that on SEA- it's the name of this server, SQL-01. I can do my authentication, and I'm going to specify and put this into a database. We'll just call it Scratchpad. There we go. Let's test that connection, make sure everything works good. All things up and running. Looks good. We'll click OK. You can load these into an existing table, or you can create these new ones. So here, I can create the table I want the information to go into, or I can click a new table. So notice when I click on New Table, it then opens up the Create Table command, and I can come in here and manipulate that command. And so we're going to call that the returns table. So I'm going to build a returns table based upon the output that I do with this data transformation there, you can see that the name of the table is going to be changed to returns and all the fields that will be built as part of this transformation. Now we have to map the columns coming in from the input to the destination columns. Since we're creating a new table, integration services will be able to automatically detect the appropriate column mappings. The way it does that is we click on the Mappings tab here. And so here's my available input columns and my available destination columns. And it's just going to do a standard title ID to title ID, item count to item count, weight to weight. So if you called customer number one field in one database and customer number, a different name of a field, this is where you would do the mappings of those different fields from the old name to the new name, based upon where the information is going to go. If you're populating an existing table, whether input destination columns don't match exactly, you'll be able to manually define these mappings right down here in the bottom. All right, so we'll click OK. Everything looks good there. So I want to see this information as it goes through here. So I can do that. We've got these new things called data viewers. So if I take this bottom arrow here, the one from between aggregate and data destination, right mouse click that and go to data viewers. It allows me to view some of the new information. So I'm going to click on new. And notice we've got 4 different types: grids, histograms, scatter plotters, column charts. Click OK there and there. So notice it creates the little eyeglasses there, allowing me to look at the data as we go through there. This is new. You did not have this feature in DTS at all. So it allows you to actually see the data as it's transformed and gives you the ability to correct any errors or make adjustments before deploying the package into a production environment. All right, so I think we're all set to go. Let's try this bad boy. So click on the Start Debugging. And it's going to start some output here. Oh, you know what? I got an error because I've tried that on this machine before and the destination was already out there. So it tried to clean that and we ran into a problem there. So let's go ahead and close this out. Let's stop that. Let's see if we can fix this right quick. Let's go into our destination here. And let's create a new table because that table already exists. So let's call this something different than returns. We'll call it returns 2 because I've already done this demo on this machine before and that's what it's running into, I think. Hopefully that's just my problem. And let's try to execute that again. There we go. Looks good. And so you can see I got 282,000 rows of data. And I've got my little viewer here. Allows me to be able to take a look at what data was aggregated and the items that I was able to do throughout that entire process. Well, that's one that I created. Let's take a look at a little bit more complex one than that. So let's go to File and Open. Let's open an existing database that's out there. So what we need to close this one, stop it from running. There we go. So let's open up a new project. And this is one that I'm going to open that you automatically have out there. So this comes with SQL Server. So if we go to My Drive C, and I'm going to look under Program Files, Microsoft SQL Server. There's Program Files, Microsoft SQL Server. There we go. And 9.0 and samples. Got a little. You got to drill down into this. So integration services. And where do I want to look at integration services? Let's look at the package samples. And the package sample we want to work with first is one called calculated columns. There it is right there. Notice the N in a .sln for our project file. So I'm going to go ahead and open that project up. If you don't have this on your system, if you go to Microsoft.com/download and search for SQL Server 2005 downloads, this sample that I'm getting ready to show you right now, you can actually download this one. So let's double click on the calculated columns over here in our Solution Explorer. And that's going to open up the project for me. This looks like a pretty simple one to begin with. There's my control flow. I've got a copy file. Let's take a look at what this copy file task does. Okay, so it's going to copy a file from the destination, overwrite from the source to the destination. So it'll overwrite the existing file, and it's going to source from a file called results.txt. All right, all that looks good. Let's point down into our calculated fields. Oh, I tell you what, I skipped a step there. I wanted to look at, notice down here, there's my results.txt. So let's look at where it's going to put that. It's going to path that all the way out to where we got this sample and put a file called results.txt. Let's take a look at calculated values, see what it does there. Notice, as I opened up the calculated values, it went into data flow. So here's all the data flow that happens inside of that. That previous one was control flow. Now we're looking at data flow process. Let's go through each one of these individual steps and take a look at what's happening inside of our data flow task. First, we're retrieving the data from an OLDB source. So here in the calculated values, extracting data, I've got a SQL command here. Notice I'll highlight it for you can see it. Select product ID, comma quantity, comma actual cost from production.transaction history archive. We're also using all the columns selected by the SQL query for the data flow. So let's take a look at the columns we've got here. So there's the 3 columns, and we're using all 3 of those available in our data transformation. Let's come out of that. Now notice I've got a little sizing problem here, so let's pull that window up there so I can cancel out of that. Let's look next at the calculated line item total. This is a derived column task. This type of task looks into incoming rows, performs some calculations, and uses the results of the calculations as an extra column to be sent to the output task. In this case, we're adding a new column to each row called line item total cost. So notice here we've got line item total cost. It's a new column, and what's the math for that? It's take the quantity times the actual cost and creates this new column for me. I can tell it what type of data it is, length, precision, etc., etc. Next, we have an aggregate task. So here's our aggregate function, sum, quantity, and line item total cost. What happens next is part of our transformation. We then calculate the average cost. Once this is complete, another derived column task will calculate the average product cost by dividing the total product cost by the sum of the quantity sold. Again, this value, since it's monetary value, is stored in a currency data type in the new column. Then I've got a task here called sort by product ID. Let's look inside the details of this sort. The sort transformation editor is going to open up here, and again, get in the habit of maximizing things. Notice there, I can remove my duplicates. So I'm going to use product ID and do ascending type of sort order and sort order 1. I'm just going to use one field, but if I had multiple fields, I can determine which columns will be sorted first. For example, if you're sorting some sales data, you might want to sort it from, let's say by country, and then within country by region. In this case, the country would have sort order value of 1, and region would have sort order value 2. So you can put the sequence that you want here right in the sort order columns. So let's come out of that. And let's look at our last tech down here, load data. In this case, we're loading data into a flat file. We're already defining the connection from the transaction summary by product. It's a file that exists on the file system. We're specifying that when we load the data in the file, we're going to overwrite any existing data by this little checkbox right here. Let's look at our mappings. This shows the available input fields and the destination fields to map up what's going to happen to our final destinations. Not going to make any changes there. All that looks good. Got some sizing problems again with this column with this resolution here because I'm using this lower resolution. Can't get to them to that cancel button. Now let's add some data viewers like we looked at in the first example so we can watch the data as it gets transformed here. Here we're going to use the default grid viewer. So let's go to the field, the arrow that goes between the calculated line item total cost. So I've got to scroll back up here, that one right there, and between that one and the sum quantity line item total cost. So right mouse click on this green arrow, data viewers, add, we're going to do a grid, OK, and OK. So notice that I added the little glasses icon there for us. Let's add another data viewer to get an idea how the data has been transformed by the earlier task. So I'm going to go down by, let's see, past my sort product ID before I load the data. And right mouse click there, data viewer, and add. Now this time, instead of a grid, we'll do a histogram so you can see an example of that. Click OK there. Let's go back into that one for a second. I clicked OK too quick. And the histogram I want to do by average cost by ID. Okay. This histogram allows us to be able to look at the average product cost so we can get a quick graph, a snapshot of the average production cost. If we look at the histogram and notice our average product cost seems abnormally high or low, we know to go back to the data flow and check our calculations to verify we define those correctly. So I've got our second viewer built off the right field, hopefully this time, and let's fire it off. So I click on this little green arrow here, start debugging. Since we're still in the Data Flow tab, it's important to note that when you start debugging the package, the execution begins with the first task of the control flow pane. In this case, it means the file copy operation must succeed first before the execution of the data flow will begin. Our data viewer window opens, so let's see what's inside of them. So we've got to move things around. Let's open up inside of this one. So let me kind of scroll up a little bit so you can see things kind of turned yellow. And why did it stop? Well, it's because I put these data flow controls in here. So I can see, and I'll kind of make these fields a little bit bigger so you can see what's going on here. There we go. Size things out a little bit. When we look at the first data viewer, we can see that the derived column line item total cost has been calculated and added to each row. So I can continue on. So to continue on, I click on the little arrow here inside of that, so it kind of stopped everything at this point. Notice when I click on the green arrow inside of my viewer, data will now continue to flow. We started with 18,000 rows at the very top. And we'll go ahead and close that so things will continue to run. Watch things go from yellow to green as the data continues to go down the process. Notice the bottom boxes have now turned yellow. Why? Because we've stopped it yet again here for us to be able to look at the data as it's getting transformed. Okay, so here's our histogram. And that allows us to be able to transform all of that data and be able to do everything that we needed in that process. So let's go ahead and do our final, allow it to go ahead and continue. And look at our data one more time. So we started out with 89,253 rows in the data that we extracted from our initial source. The final destination, we got 497 rows of data loaded into our final text file that we set as our output. We could use any type of text editor or Excel to be able to look at this data source, or even, we could pull that data that we just created from this package in with another package. All right, so that's our demonstration number one. In that demonstration, I know it was a long one, but there's a lot of great stuff there. We learned about BI Development Studio, the tools that we use to build things with integration services. We built our first data flow project, and then we looked at one of the sample ones that come with SQL Server 2005. So let's look up what's next on our agenda. Now that you have a brief introduction to IS, let's move on to the next agenda item, improving data integration with SSIS. Sometimes you'll hear the short term SSIS, and what that stands for is SQL Server Integration Services. Because integration services have been redesigned from the ground up, you may face some challenges in upgrading from previous DTS packages. So one of our lowlights here is the ability to directly migrate your existing DTS packages from SQL Server 2000 to SQL Server 2005. Integration Services is limited. Again, this is because Integration Services was essentially a brand new product. Because of this, in most cases, it will be best if you redesign your DTS packages into new Business Intelligence Development Studio. However, don't get upset yet. We do have the migration tools available to enable many of the packages to migrate from DTS to Integration Services. And for those installations that cannot migrate immediately, we've included a DTS runtime component inside of SQL Server 2005 that will allow you to continue to run your existing DTS packages until you're able and ready or have the time to migrate these to SQL Server 2005 Integration Services. Once you're able to redesign everything to a new IS, you'll be able to then start reaping the benefits of the many new features and capabilities of Integration Services. So what did we change compared to DTS versus Integration Services? The number one is improved performance. Performance has been greatly improved since the introduction of SQL Server 2005 IS. Here's an example of performance improvement. Two data flows performing various ETL operations were performed both in DTS with SQL Server 2000 as well as Integration Services with SQL Server 2005. In this specific case, transformations that took over 1,200 seconds when using DTS only took 173 seconds with Integration Services. This should help illustrate the most compelling reason to move to the new version. Your mileage may vary. But again, everything I've seen from my hands-on stuff, you see about this type of performance improvement over DTS. Let's talk next about the business factors driving the demand for Integration Services. In most organizations, time available to process batches is decreasing. Traditionally, businesses have 9 hours or weekend hours to process and transform their data, loading it into data warehousing, and then resuming your operations. Now, however, more and more businesses operate continuously 24/7. International operations have no quiet time to perform these type of batch processing because of time differences, online business operations in real time, etc. These conditions mean that any downtime is costly, and the need for continuous operation just doesn't apply to large businesses, but medium and small businesses as well. And there are also more and more legal regulations governing the data systems and compliance. National and international laws and guidelines, such as Sarbanes-Oxley or Basel II, mean that businesses have to have strict control over the data, keeping logs of what is happening and how mechanisms in place have for auditing compliance. So we've got much better auditing control in IS than we did over in the old previous DTS. And furthermore, business users are becoming more and more sophisticated in their knowledge and understanding of the data that the business runs. And they need to have special operations take place as data is coming into the business. At every level, users want to be able to make intelligent business decisions based upon timely data. Business demands intelligence tools that can handle the data in complex ways with high performance and minimum downtime. What's also changed is the data demands. The amount of data businesses have to store and process is growing at an astounding rate. Online storing warehouse information in every click on their websites in order to analyze that data. Call centers now integrate with databases so they can find warehouses and analyze data about every phone call. New technologies like RFID or radio frequency identification promises to add yet another large amount of data into the mix. I mean, take this laptop, for example. I've got a 100 gigabyte internal drive, and I'm running off of a 500 or half a terabyte external drive and a laptop. Who would ever think we got to such levels with the volume of data? Not only sheer volume of data as information is growing, but the number of sources including. Businesses need to analyze data from database formats. They also have data coming in from web services, HTML, RSS feeds, XML data, data stored in spreadsheets, documents, text files, databases, all over the place. You can have lots of different data source types. Some may be structured, some unstructured. Some may be only semi-structured, meaning all data that may not be in a predictable form. So getting it transformed into one reliable, consistent database we can do with Integration Services. In addition to growing the number of data sources, the number of data destinations is growing as well. People want to get information on their PDAs, their mobile phones, their personal web portals, on the internet, or through an intranet or extranet. With all these demands that have been growing the needs for more and more robust products that can reliably and quickly handle the demands of large volumes of data with diverse sources as well as destinations, and IS helps address all of these needs. So back in the old days, back in SQL Server 2000, integration and warehousing required separate staged operations. For example, in a semi-structured data from a call center would be transformed with text mining and then loaded into a staging database. Legacy data would then be transformed with hand coding used from the languages like OC or COBOL, and then loaded into the different staging databases. At the same time, you would perform traditional ETL on the databases like SQL Server or Oracle, and again then send it to a staging database. This process of data preparation often required different, incompatible tools for each type of data that you wanted to process. Once all that data was from various sources was cleansed and loaded into a staging databases, the data would then often be cleansed yet a second time and integrated into yet another staging database, which could combine all this data into one source. Finally, then the data would be moved from the staging database to the data warehouse or data mart, which you could then do the analyzation and reporting of the data. Once you're able to report on the data, alerts and escalations based upon the data from the warehouse often came too late to make intelligent decisions because based upon the time of the data needed to prepare, stage, and load the data of each time, your business opportunity may have already passed. With the data preparation, transformation was in progress, new data was continually coming in, so getting a reasonably up-to-date snapshot of how your business was actually performing was almost impossible. In addition to the volume of data increase, the scenario became increasingly unworkable because the time needed to process the data increased, which in turn increased the latency between what data users were seeing and what was actually coming in and yet unprocessed. Now with integration services, we've taken much of that difficulty out of integrating the data from different data sources and sending it to the cleaned up data to various destinations. The same types of source data, we can now use built-in text mining components or semi-structured or unstructured data using custom data sources for legacy data and a number of standard sources for retrieving data from relational databases. Also, while staying within integration services, we can clean up, merge it together, and perform data mining operations directly on the data, so no longer do we need this staging of data and taking all those additional steps like in previous versions. We can easily send the data from integration services directly to a number of destinations. For example, we can load the data into data warehouses and provide reports and data formatted for mobile users, all within the same integration services packages. Reports can now come from within data warehouse as well, but it's also worth noting we can actually create reports directly from within integration services, saving time on loading of data into the warehouse. Now data integration and warehousing from multiple sources to multiple destinations has combined into a single, manageable, auditable, and that's key for all those new government guidelines, auditable operations, so you can audit everything that goes through the transformation. You can also use various degrees of parallelization in the transformation, loading, and reporting of data, allowing you to decrease the time needed to get your data from sources to the destination. Reporting and escalation can be parallelized within the warehouse load, so the users can receive information as quickly as possible, including near real-time information, which enables them to make intelligent business decisions based upon the continually up-to-date information. This process uses integration services and scales very well to handle extremely large volumes of data and complex amounts of type of processing. We're able to quickly perform complex transformations on large data sets, meaning that your users will get the data they need in a timely manner. So enough of the slides here. Let's go back and take a second demonstration. In this next demonstration, we're going to take a look at redirected failed lookups and comparing and cleansing some of the data that we have with our integration services. Almost said data transformation services. Got to watch myself there. I like to use the old terminology. Excuse me there while I took a sip of water. My mouth's a little bit dry. Enjoy the outside too much this weekend. All right, so we're back to the exact same demonstration environment. Again, remember F5, so if you want to see it in full view so you can get all those other screens out of the way there. So we're going to go back to our Visual Studio here, and I'm going to open up a different package. So let's go to File. Oh wait, this one's still running, so let's go ahead and close it. Can't open a new one while you got one running, so File, Open. So we're going to open up an existing project. Let's see where we want to go. We're going to drill all the way down. There's my package samples that we've got. So that was all the way for your reference. If you didn't see the first demo, program files, Microsoft SQL Server, 9.0, samples, integration services package examples is how I got to this folder, and now the data cleaning example. So again, this one comes or ships with SQL Server, and there we go. You can see all the scripts that were used to create this package. You can download this if you don't have available to you. So it's a free download. So the sample that I'm using here is free. So there's our data cleaning. Double click on it over my Solution Explorer. This has a single package defined, so we'll take a look at the contents. This package begins with a SQL task in the control flow. Based upon the name of the task, we can see that it puts some data into a database for this task. So create customer address reference table, populate new customer input table. So you can see it all the way spelled out here for us. So let's double click on that thing, and if I double click on it, it'll open it up. Know the file connection here, create tables.sql. So just to give you a quick example, there's the SQL commands that we see. So it's going to go out there and do a select star statement for me. And it's going to do joins if it exists. So there's all our code that actually gets happened in our query for fuzzy lookup. All right, let's hop out of that. The source of the SQL task is a script stored on our file system. We won't take a look at the detail code, but you saw an idea of what it is. Once this SQL script runs, we have a data flow task. Let's take a look at that now. Our data sources here is a database. So if I take a look at this fuzzy lookup data flow task, this is really complex. It's going to take me a minute to go through and explain everything that goes on here. So follow along with me. Here I've got the beginning where things do what's called a fuzzy lookup, so I've got to have a source of my data. So let's take a look at this OLDB data source. So this is pulling from AdventureWorks. AdventureWorks is that sample database that we've got out there, and there's a table called customer leads that we're going to pull from. Let's go ahead and cancel out of that. Again, I can't see my cancel screen here, so bear with me just a second. Got to resize this window. There we go. Next, let's take a look at what happens after we get that data from the database. So let's take a look up against our existing customer database. This is a transformation task. We're taking a look at the data we retrieved from the data source. We're performing a lookup against the reference table, which is a view that's defined here. So we've got a view called customer address in the lookup of AdventureWorks table. For a match to occur, each of the columns specified must match exactly for the match. Any row that does not have the exact match for each one of these columns specified here will fail the lookup. Let's take a look at our columns that it's going to compare. There we go. So notice it's going to match first name to first name, last name to last name, address line 1, city, state, and country region. So let's go ahead and cancel out of that. And let's go ahead and start our debugging process. When we execute this package, let's see what happens. Almost immediately, hopefully it'll happen here. We'll see if it happens or not. Because the transformation lookup task is designed to fail, when any row of the input fails the lookup, this means that we have a row of our data that does not exist in the exact match. Yep, oh, looks like we found all the matches, so we've already fixed that. So let's go ahead and stop our debugging here and show you I must have already fixed this when I demoed last time from this one. Let's do our lookup and go back into this lookup again against existing customers. And notice here if I want to go to the configure any output error. Okay, so let's go ahead and maximize this. There's another one of those buttons we wouldn't have seen if we had to maximize it. So configure our output. And there we go. So that was ignore, fail the component, or redirect now. So I'm going to switch that to redirect now. That's why it worked, so we didn't have any fails. So click OK there, and OK, and that's why it went ahead and executed just fine for us. The red arrow, so notice this red arrow line here. Any row for which an exact match is not found in the reference table is redirected to what's called a fuzzy lookup task. The fuzzy lookup task performs a linguistic analysis of the data to attempt to determine if the data actually matches existing data of the database. This helps you correct minor misspellings like differences in punctuation and so on. You know, how many times is the street name or not drive or court, that kind of stuff. The fuzzy logic tools and integration services are extremely powerful and help reduce the amount of data that you have to manually cleanse. When the fuzzy lookup is used, the two scores are generated, the confidence and the similarity. Each of these scores can have a value between 0 and 1 and indicates how confident integration services is that a found match has been happened and how similar that input row is to a row in the reference table. The confidence and similarity scores are calculated differently so you may view that item with high similarity which has low confidence and vice versa. After the fuzzy lookup, we're going to perform another operation on the data that originally caused the error. The conditional split is designed to examine rows for certain conditions. If the conditions are met, the row is sent to one output. If the condition is not met, it's passed on to the next condition, and so on. If the condition is met, the row is sent directly to the output, and it continues on. So let's take a look at this conditionally split. There we go, on similarity. And maximize that. So you can see our output here. We're going to go to good fuzzy match if it's 0.7 or higher. If it's not good fuzzy match found, we're going to go in 0.7 or lower. So we have to have a 70% likelihood that it's a good match. So now we have a good fuzzy match found, so it's put back over here in our good side of our flow. So here we had an exact match. It flows down the left-hand side. We did not have an exact match. It goes to a fuzzy lookup. We got a conditional split. If it's more than 70%, then it goes back over here to the left-hand side. But how are we going to get it all back into it? We're going to use this command called a union all. Okay, so union all is going to glue that information back together. The union all task takes the rows that have extracted match earlier in the data flow. This means by using fuzzy logic capabilities of IS, we're automatically able to further match and clean up the data without having to manually examine it, which is an important time-saving feature for database administrators and developers. The union all task has been determined to be for take existing customers and are sent to our data destination further down in our diagram here. There we go. So that's going to be our output of existing customers. If no good fuzzy match is found, then the data is sent on to a different task called fuzzy grouping. Let's take a look at what this fuzzy grouping does. The fuzzy grouping task looks at the rows that come in and performs some linguistic analysis again on them, attempt to determine if there's a duplicate, data that's similar enough to group together before it is being sent to our output. Let's take a look at the columns tab here. Oh, forgot to maximize it. There we go. Notice there's match type and minimum similarity. So 0.25, we've got it before it'll have a matching. Because we want it to match on first name and last name, you know, things like address isn't quite as important to specifically point to those. Notice we've got numerals and comparison flags. In the Advanced tab up here, we can specify how to add columns to the data for grouping purposes. Each of the rows has an input key and an output key specified. Rows that meet the fuzzy grouping criteria will have the same output key value, meaning that the integration services has determined that they are similar enough to be duplicates. The similar score for each row is added to the next column as well. Let's go ahead and cancel out of that. Next, we're performing another conditional split to further clean up the data. As just mentioned, the fuzzy grouping task adds input key and output keys to the column. In this task, we'll take a look at the columns to determine what to do with the duplicate records. Okay, so let's go down here. We got duplicate unique keys here, or duplicate keys. And so that's what it would have to do for our determining our unique. Let's go over and look at how that union all function worked. So let me double click that. There's how it union to put the input together from two different inputs and outputs it into one output. All right, so let's next add some data viewers to all this so we can see what's happening to the data. We'll add a data viewer to show us the data that will be sent to the existing customer destination. So first thing I want to do is pick this green arrow right here between Union All and our final destination. Data viewer, add, what kind do we want? Oh, we'll just pick this default grid, OK, and OK. We'll also add a filter that we can look at the results of the fuzzy lookup operation. So between my fuzzy lookup of existing customers, let's see, where do we want to put it? Conditional, let's put it right before the conditional split on similarity. So this green arrow right here, right mouse click there, data viewers. What kind do I want? We'll just do the standard grid, OK, and OK. Finally, we'll add a third data viewer after the fuzzy grouping operation. So we'll go to this fuzzy grouping. Yeah, it's this one right here I want to add as my third one. And nope, we still there? Is that you trying to join in? Everything all right?
Yeah, no, this is John Tracy. Yep. Has lost all phone and internet, so I'm stepping in.
Okay, cool. Just want to know, sound like somebody else is joining in. So
that's me.
No problem. As long as everybody can hear us on the end, we're doing good. So all right, so let's continue on with the demonstration here. We're going to add in yet a third grid that we've got here. So grid for our data viewer. That looks good and good. So now I've got 3 different glasses set up, or 3 different viewers as part of this transformation that we're going to look at. So let's go ahead and execute this whole thing. So now we click on execute. It should start chugging away here. There's 1, 2, and all 3 windows look like they're slowly getting built here. It may take just a second for your windows to refresh. There we go. Notice we got some things turning green. So we started out with 15 rows of our data source. So we're going to kind of have to move things around here so we can take a look at our different designs. So we got 1 row that was matched and fell through this row. So which one of these data viewers do we want to look at? Let's move these fuzzy lookups. Let's look at this one first. So if I resize it, there we go. You can see some of the data that's in there. So this is the fuzzy lookup output, and so you can see where it was trying to match on these different fields. So the first name and last name didn't quite match up, and we've got error counts there, so we can look at all the data. The 14 rows that failed show up here, and here we can look at the output of the lookup task. In our case, we have several rows of similar characteristics, either misspelled or mistyped names. Normally, we would have to have someone manually search through and correct all this data, but we'll use IS to help us with these tasks. The right of fields, the fuzzy lookup, has added some of our new columns that we were talking about. So if I scroll right over here, way down, they're kind of hard to see because of sizing, but those gives us our similarity on the last name. So you can see there's our scoring between 0 and 1, sometimes a percentage. So let's go ahead and let it go on to the next step. So if I click on the continue debugging option here in that window, information is going to flow to the next one. So let me go ahead and close that one out so we can make this a little bit bigger. So here's our look at the data as it goes into Union All. So we had 1 match come through the exact matches, and now we've got 1, 2, 3 records now in this Union All. So we had 2 records that came from the fuzzy matching capabilities and were added back into our database. So we can see it matched above the 0.70, so that one's a 0.78 and this one's a 0.77. And so they were averaged and brought back into it. So let's go ahead and continue on to the next step. Looks like data's continued there, so let's close that one. And then finally, you can follow down in our colors here. We've got 1 last grouping here in our fuzzy grouping. We're taking a look at the duplicates that we had. And there, that's going to find all of our duplicates, so we can scroll over to the key in and key out fields. There's key in, key out, and you can see that those were added to this. And then I've got a score column, so it'll show me what kind of score I had, that yes, that was most likely a duplicate. Each row was scored based on its similarity to other rows. A score of 1 means that a row is identical to itself. In the third row, we can see here that the result of the fuzzy grouping operation. This row is determined to be a duplicate of the row above it, which is a score of 90%. The key out column of this row has been changed to indicate the row is similar to. When we continue debugging, the conditional split will send some items with different input keys and output keys to the destination that we designated for duplicate records. Only unique records are moved into the destination for the potential customer leads. So click on our final let the data flow through. All of our dialog boxes go to green, and our transformation successfully completes. So we can go ahead and stop our debugging there, and we'll return back to the slides. I know there's lots of details here, but again, you've got all of these that you can either download or came with SQL Server, all the demonstrations I've shown you so far today. All right, now that we've seen how we can use integration services to improve our ETL processes, let's talk more about the data sources and data destinations. Integration services uses adapters to get data from diverse sources such as binary files, XML, or relational databases. Data sources can be diverse, including custom or scripted adapters. So I can connect to all kinds of things. I've used this to connect to Oracle, DB2, Sybase, you name it. Once integration services reads the data from these sources, transformation components shape and modify the data in many different ways, such as aggregation, counting, combining, or splitting text fields, or reformatting the data into a new format. Data has been routed by rules or error conditions for cleansing and conforming. Data can be routed to multiple destinations based upon the conditions. For example, you can use integration services to validate data against a table. Rows that pass validation can then be added to one database, while rows that fail validation can be directed for further examination or to automatically attempt to correct the errors in the validation. Data flows and control flows can be as complex as your business rules. Highly concurrent allows you to be able to parallelize your data with integration operations for better performance. And finally, data can be loaded in a number of destinations, including standard relational databases, analysis services cubes, Excel spreadsheets, and you can output those to reporting services reports. So what are our customer benefits? First, integration services gives you high performance for data integrity capabilities. Integration services is buffer oriented, so it performs operations in memory instead of out on the hard disk. In fact, instead of copying into memory, data is transformed while in the same memory location, so you can process large volumes of data with complex operations faster than ever before. Again, we mentioned some statistics earlier, much higher capacity than DTS. Integration services easily facilitates data integration, includes many pre-built adapters for data sources, destinations, and transformation types that reduce or completely eliminate the need to do hand-coded or custom data transformations. Integration services also has extensible object model, enables you to develop or customize scripted components if you do have to need to write a custom code for your integration services packages. VI Development Studio, which is built again on Visual Studio, is productive, intuitive visual environment for building and debugging integration services solutions. The inclusion of data viewers allows you to be able to see real-time how integration services will transform your data so that you can quickly see what problems may occur and what's actually happening inside of your data inside of the package. You can also handle and cleanse difficult semi-structured or unstructured data during loading and transformation with integration features of IS. You can perform data mining and text mining operations within IS services packages. You can perform conditional processing of potential problematic data, intelligently escalating issues such as detecting fraudulent transactions, all within inside of integration services. Let me just briefly touch here on one case study that we've talked about. Barnes & Noble set out with the objective of using SQL Server 2005 to capture transaction-level sales and store data, particularly about their store data. They were looking at inventory levels. And they wanted to increase sales and improve performance of their business. And so this case study is available online at Microsoft.com/SQL Evaluation Case Studies, and just search there for Barnes & Noble, and you'll be able to download all the information about this Barnes & Noble example. The company faced several challenges, including the instances of running out of stock at some stores while maintaining inappropriate stock levels at other stores. Volumes of data that need to be analyzed was enormous, making analysis of the data and causing the operational system to become overloaded. In adopting SQL Server 2005 and integration services, Barnes & Noble was able to create slowly changing dimensions, which made the handling of enormous stock dimensions much easier. Because of the flexibility and performance of integration services, the customer was able to achieve a high performance on a low-cost commodity system and avoid contention issues with other data warehouse servers. The volume of the data and integration services handled in this particular case was large, about 1.6 terabytes of specific raw data. The results, then when they moved to SQL Server 2005 IS was dramatic. Development time was cut in half. Data integration showed up to a 400% performance improvement over previous DTS. And most importantly, Integration Services was able to deliver more meaningful, up-to-date information to help Barnes & Noble reach their projected objectives, giving greater value back to the customer. So let's go to our session conclusion. I think that's we've covered everything we wanted to do there. As you've seen today, SQL Server 2005 Integration Services is a brand new product from the ground up. Again, totally replaces DTS. You have a number of new data sources and data destinations available to you. You can extract data from more places than ever. In addition to new data sources and destinations, you just saw a few new ways that you can transform data within Integration Services, reducing the need to hand code data transformation packages outside of the BI development environment. If you want more additional information, you can get information there in the communities. And now let's take a look at questions and answers, see what kind of questions you got out there. So I guess it's Eric. I'll turn it over to you and see if you give me a minute to go and take a look and see if there are any questions.
Great, thanks so much, John. Real quickly, ladies and gentlemen, while John looks at the Q&A pane, I do see we have a few questions in there now. I want to remind everybody that we're going to be pushing out the evaluation in just 1 minute, as we do with every webcast. And also, for those of you who aren't aware, although I'm sure many of you are at this point, we are offering a promotion where with every evaluation that is submitted, you are entered into a drawing. You're throwing your name into the hat to win a Microsoft Zune digital media player. So please do take a moment to fill that out. They're very important. The information you provide is very important to us. So if you could do that, we'd really appreciate it. For upcoming and previously live webcasts, including a replay of this webcast, you can go to www.microsoft.com/webcast. Our entire catalog is available at that location. If you have webcast content ideas, please let us know about it. We'd like to hear what you would like to see. That's a pretty long URL there, and I think you've probably seen some other URLs that John has pushed out. So what we do, if you want to get a quick reference back to them, you can go to the File menu at this time and select Print to PDF, and that will give you a local copy of these slides, which will give you a quick reference to these URLs that have been pushed out today. And last of all, if you have any webcast, this webcast has been presented using Microsoft Office Live Meeting. This is a fantastic collaboration tool, and if you're not currently using it in your business, it's really worth giving it a try. Microsoft Live Meeting is offering a 14-day free trial, and you can access that at www.microsoft.com/presentlive. Now I'll go ahead and push the evaluation out, ladies and gentlemen. If you would like to have the first half of your evaluation pre-populated, you click on the Registered Online link, and that will launch an evaluation that will be pre-filled out with information you entered when you registered for this webcast. If you prefer to start with a blank copy of the evaluation, you can go ahead and click the All Other Registrants link to do that. John, I'm done. You want to go ahead and go through those questions?
Yeah, let's answer a few of them here, just a few in the queue. And again, if you have a question, don't hesitate to key it in there, and I'll do my best to answer it. I don't know if we got time to get to them all today, but if you don't, again, you can email me at john.weston, easier for me to say. How about jweston@microsoft.com? Email me your questions. I'll also be posting all these questions I've gotten in and the answers to those up on my blog at blogs.technet.com//jweston. So let's just take a look at a couple of them here. Ryan asks, can you use Integration Services to use Analysis Services 2000 and 2005 as a data source? Absolutely. Okay. Another question here we've got, is it possible to have SQL Server 1 synchronize with another database on SQL Server number 2 for redundant services? This actually isn't part of Integration Services. You could do that. You could create a package to pump the data over from 1 to 2. That's a whole lot of work to have to do. You could actually use the replication capabilities of SQL Server 2005. So let's say, for example, I've got a hot site that I want to replicate my data over, so I could use replication with transaction logs and replicate my data over to a second server in case something happens to my first server, and I could repoint everybody over to that. And there's all kinds of active-active, active-passive, and all kinds of wonderful things that we can do with that. So again, that's kind of a whole other topic there. Another question here, comparing SSIS to BizTalk, and talk about some licensing questions about BizTalk. Kind of BizTalk's a separate product, and he's asking for the comparison between is SSIS better or BizTalk. Well, gosh, being a SQL person and I've been a DBA for many, many years, obviously I'm kind of a little biased towards SQL Server there, but BizTalk is another wonderful product in its own. And which editions come with SSIS? So is the last question here, and that is the standard and enterprise editions as well as the developer editions of SQL Server come with SSIS. But if you're using just, for example, the MSDE database as a backend, of course, things like all of the Business Intelligence Studio is not going to come with that version of the small runtime of SQL Server. That looks like all the questions that are out there. Again, what I will do is I will capture all of these in the Q&A log that we've got at the bottom here. I'll hang around for about another 5 or 10 minutes and answer any other ones that you want to enter. But if you don't get a chance to ask it now, again, don't hesitate to go to my blog, send me a question that way, or just send me an email directly at jweston@microsoft.com. Back over to you, Eric.
Great, thanks so much, John. Really appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, just going to remind you once again, we do have the evaluation launch page up on the screen. So before you log out today, we'd be extremely grateful if you could take a moment and let us know what you thought of today's webcast. But for now, that will conclude the audio portion of this webcast. I want to give a special thank you to John Weston for bringing us an excellent presentation today. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for attending. We hope you will come back and see some more of our webcasts soon. But for now, that will conclude this webcast. Thanks for attending, and we look forward to seeing everybody online again soon.